Hello. Yes, we're live? Okay. Hello, I am Cecilia Conrad, and I'm with my colleague today, Jenna Schornack. We are both from an organization called Lever for Change. It's a 2-year-old nonprofit, and our focus is how can we connect donors with high impact, powerful solutions and social change organizations. Today, we're going to talk a bit about our approach to doing this, which involves a form of philanthropic competitions or challenges. But I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about our origin story, how we got started in this process, because I think it'll help you understand the kind of mechanism that we've designed. So before joining Lever for Change, and in fact, still I'm also with the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. And some of you in the audience might be familiar with an open call that we've done twice now called 100 and Change. 100 and Change is a competition that asks for ideas about what you could do with $100 million to solve a problem, take a big slice of a problem, or really unlock the resources required to solve a problem. How it came about was that several years ago, our then president at MacArthur, Julia Stash, asked a question, a what-if question. She said, what if we set aside a large amount of funds comparable to what we might do in our big bets, but we don't actually decide how to spend it, that we rely on outside voices to tell us what problem you might look at and also help to define how the problem can be solved. What if we were truly open and transferred a lot of the power that traditionally resides within the institutional philanthropist, in our case, out to the problem solvers, the people in the field, the people who have the ideas about how to solve a problem, but are rarely given the freedom and the space to actually come up with those ideas and present them, or given the types of funding that they need to really bring those great ideas to scale. That was the motivation for the way we set up 100 and Change. And Lever for Change kind of spun out of that because what we recognized is that we had developed a tool, a process that opened up philanthropy opened up opportunities for funding to organizations who might not necessarily be in the network of the individual funder or the individual philanthropist, a process that allowed the organizations themselves to tell us what their strategy would be for solving a problem, and a process that could help donors, individual donors, family foundations. We've also worked with institutional funders to actually connect with some of the organizations with the great ideas that they might not encounter because they're reluctant to do a truly open call. As you might know, open calls are rare in philanthropy, but this is something that we have set up a structure to do, and to do in a way that we feel is humane and ethical. The organizations get feedback, and so we think there's a real opportunity here to share this idea with others and for others to adopt a similar kind of practice. That's going to be our tone today. So we want to start with a bit of an icebreaker. But before we do that, I want to give my chance to my colleague, Jenna Schornack, to hear her voice. Jenna?
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us. We are really excited to be here and meet all of you. We have designed a session that we hope is as interactive as possible. Part of our ethos at Cecilia TED is being open and getting as many voices as possible. So we encourage you to use the chat. We will have some polls soon, and we want to hear your ideas about designing a competition. So looking forward to the next 90 minutes.
So let's start our slides now. I think we're waiting for our first slide to go up on the screen.
I think it's up, Cecilia.
I'm not sure it is. You see it? Okay. All right. Yes, there we are. All right. For the first thing we'd like for you to do is to give us inside the chat a little bit of sense of who you are and whether you are a grant maker, a grant seeker, or a philanthropy supporter? And then just a couple words about what your perception is of doing philanthropic competitions. All right, please tap in the chat if you have some thoughts on who you are and what you're.
It looks like we have some grant makers, some grant seekers, some supporters of philanthropy from all over the world, some folks interested in refugees, which is great because we just ran a refugee competition.
And I see one comment about philanthropic competitions that says they are time-consuming and challenging, so that's something we can address today. And then there's the challenge if they can be equitable, and so that's another topic that we will try and take on today. So continue to type those in there, and we'll keep track of some of the issues you want us to address. In addition, place any questions there, and we'll periodically pause and take some of those as we go along. So let's now turn to our polls. The first poll is for grant makers. And it's really asking, what would your giving look like if you didn't have some of the traditional barriers in order to be able to identify the projects you want to fund? And we're open to everyone to do each one of the polls, even though each question is going to be targeting a different group. We have one for grant makers. Later, we'll have one for grant seekers, and then one for everyone, including the philanthropy supporters.
All right, it's looking like sourcing better and more and better projects is in the lead, as well as finding scalable projects. So because we work with donor partners, these questions are really important to us in designing competitions and understanding how we can get more donors off the sidelines and fund scalable, impactful projects. So we are constantly trying to find ways to remove some of these barriers for funders and also reach these goals of finding scalable projects, discovering new ideas that they might not have seen before. And so as we go along in this presentation, we will talk about some ways that we have experimented in doing some of these.
So second poll is for grant seekers. In terms of fundraising, if we could remove barriers, what would you be able to do? Would you be able to focus more on collaboration and partnerships, engage more stakeholders, those with lived experiences, propose bigger, bolder ideas, or become more sustainable? "100% bigger, bolder ideas." And that is certainly something that we are designed to try and achieve. And then the last poll to get a sense of the audience. And this one is designed for everyone. What do you think is the biggest obstacle to achieving impact at scale?
This one is more split. So it looks like the organizations lack infrastructure to absorb large grants, and then maybe organizations with scalable ideas don't have access to ambitious donors, which is something we are definitely trying to create opportunities for. and then donors struggle to find the right funding opportunities. So
And
we
all of
encourage you to use the chat and share even more reflections about these questions.
yeah, all of these are things that we're setting out to address with the structure that we've created at Lever for Change. So I want to launch a little bit more into what we do and how we do it. So as I mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization separate from MacArthur, but we are an affiliated with MacArthur. And what we do is create open and transparent competitions for donors. Our competitions focus on, one, making sure that we provide value add for all of the participants. They are typically multi-stage affairs. They begin with an open call that defines and makes clear to everyone what the criteria that will be used to evaluate projects will be. We identify the scoring rubric that will be used to score projects. We have created a tool, an organizational readiness tool, to help organizations decide whether or not it's worth their time to apply, because we understand that it can be a heavy lift to put together a proposal for one of our competitions. Once they've decided to apply, they can also see who will be evaluating the proposals. We have a panel of judges that we make their bios available, their photos available on the competition website. Every applicant that has a valid application gets feedback. They get feedback from the evaluators, and should they make it to our finalist stage, they get feedback from the technical reviewers and others, and we'll say some more about that in a moment. We find that the feedback can be very valuable for the participants in our process. Our commitment to openness and transparency helps us to create an opportunity for a level playing field for organizations of multiple sizes to participate. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we do to make sure that that door stays open. But in particular, when we get to the finalist stage in our competitions, we provide technical assistance and support, coaching, to help organizations put together the best case possible for funding. And we've had some incredible results, which I'm going to jump ahead before I get to those. After each one of our competitions, usually the donor, the competition sponsor, has one grant, maybe two, to make. But we know that there are multiple good ideas that have emerged from this process, and we put them together in something called the Bold Solutions Network, where we have all of the best ideas. We offer those up to other funders. We actively promote them and curate them to help many projects get funded. And that's the other way we try to provide value add for particularly the top applicants in our process. So we address some of the common barriers to finding ideas and funding them at scale. First, in order to help donors find the right funding opportunities, we have this rigorous process that I've given you a little bit of an overview. It elevates the best ideas. We also help donors find projects through our Bold Solutions Network. And our Bold Solutions Network kind of creates the marketplace issue. What we saw in our poll was that donors were struggling to find the right opportunities. But when we talked to organizations, if they were given the space to do so, what they would want to do is bigger and bolder ideas. So our goal is to try to match those up, to create a marketplace that goes beyond the individual competition through the Bold Solutions Network. And then we're also addressing the perceived lack of ready-to-scale ideas. Members of our Bold Solutions Network receive support from us for 2 to 3 years after the competition. And that support includes coaching, access to supportive resources, a subscription to Catch a Fire so they can get pro bono help, and a variety of supports that we provide while they are members of the Bold Solutions Network. One of the questions that's just appeared is there always just one winner in a competition like 100 and change? And the answer is no. Some competitions have multiple awards announced at the beginning, but even more importantly has been the ability we've had to generate leverage. And our goal is actually for every one of our competitions to try and double the amount of the initial commitment from the donor for the competition. So usually a donor will say, I will offer a $10 million award for the best idea having to do with to create durable futures for refugees, to take that one example. And that donor commits, we announce an open call. What we have found is that competitions kind of generate a lot of excitement and interest, and there are ways for donors to find each other, to collaborate. So very quickly after the initial kind of donor made its commitment, a second donor said, I will offer a second award. And then after the donor made its choice of who they wanted to give a grant to, they convened a group of funders with an interest in refugees, presented all 5 of their finalist projects. And instead of initially the commitment of one award for $10 million, we ended up with $26 million being granted through this process. And we're still counting, because those projects will all be part of our Bold Solutions network. And so we're hoping to continue to grow the amount of funding that's going to that field. So our goal is to unlock $1 billion by 2023. And we're doing that. About half of that is coming from awards, and about half is coming from the secondary market, from leveraging, from the connections we're making with other donors. Right now, we're at a target of $790 million, and we're just 50% of the way through the time, and we're already 75% of our way to the goal. So we're pretty excited about the potential we're seeing here to truly create a way in which funders will have an easier time finding projects, and projects will find the kind of large grants, multi-year grants, that will give the organizations the opportunity to really invest in their work and make progress towards solving some of the world's most important problems. This is our sort of circle that summarizes what I've just said. Our goal is to induce big bets on social change on the part of donors. We're asking for 10 million or more. And that was a question about the well-established organizations. Let me talk a little bit about that. We want to strengthen the social sector, and we do that through giving the feedback to organizations who might not have otherwise been able to get feedback on their proposals, investing in them through the Bold Solutions Network, and the leveraging funding, and that's what we're doing through our curation and promotion. So one of the questions was about the minimum award size of 10 million. Do the awardees tend to be large, well-established organizations? And what we have found is that we've seen a mix of organizations that get funding. There are several ways in which smaller organizations have emerged through this. Sometimes they are in collaboration with each other. In the case of the Refugee Challenge, which I just mentioned, there are 6 refugee-led organizations that are forming a global collaborative that were recipients of the $10 million prize from the competition, plus an additional $2 million from the secondary market. And Jenna, you want to talk about some of the examples from Equality Can't Wait?
Yeah, and one of the great success stories of Equality Can't Wait, which was a gender competition that just wrapped up this summer, is an organization called the Futures Indigenous Women, which was a collaboration of New Mexico Community Capital, an indigenous organization in New Mexico. And so they came together and had this opportunity to really think big. They had a small staff. They had been working very local, and they had this opportunity to dream big, and they were awarded $10 million. And received a lot of strengthening and strategic support during the process too, on how to make their collaboration stronger.
And the other point of that, we've pointed to collaboration as one of the ways in which smaller organizations have been successful in these. We have just found that competitions actually, it's almost seems ironic, but competitions frequently spur collaboration and cooperation among organizations who in the past may have been competing with each other for the same small pot of money, but when you offer a large-scale grant, they recognize that they can coordinate and combine forces and increase their probability of success. The other sort of question that's come in is about the fact that the odds in many of these open calls are low. As I mentioned earlier, that is not untrue, but what we've tried to do is to provide value add to organizations from having participated in the process. And the surveys that we've had done by a third-party independent evaluator suggest that participants in our competitions have found value in the feedback they've gotten from judges. In the case of the organization that Jenna just mentioned, one of the things we were able to do, we've created a template so that our competition proposals are very close to the same across competitions. And so we've had organizations who've participated in more than one of our challenges. And in this last case, this organization, we could actually trace how they used the judges' feedback to reframe their proposal and become more successful in our competition. We've heard from organizations that they've also become more successful, sometimes in going back to their early funders with a bigger idea in getting that funding grant increased. And that's some of our secondary market impact. So what we want to do next is to kind of talk through the design process a bit on these, and I'm going to turn it over to Jenna.
Thank you, Cecilia. Yeah, so we want to get as much input from all of you as possible. So what we are going to do is sort of deconstruct our design process and thinking about scale and systems impact. So designing a competition that will unlock a lot of great projects that can be scaled and are working at a systemic level. So we are going to take each of these steps in the process, and there are many more micro steps along the way, but we will focus on these 5 steps today, and get your input on how we can make them the best possible design. So the first one, which is very important, is topic design. So we work closely with the donor partners who are interested in running a challenge on issues that they care about, potentially underfunded issues. Sometimes we work with donor partners who have a long history of giving and a perspective, but they are interested in sort of expanding their knowledge about that area and discovering new projects. We also work with donors who are just getting their feet wet in philanthropy and coming up with sort of their perspective on what they want to fund. So they are testing a topic area and seeing what's out there. So we really work with donors on what that topic area looks like. And in a minute, we will talk about some of those key questions we ask, and also questions about people who perhaps a competition is not the right philanthropic tool. Then once we have a topic, we identify 4 criteria. So those are the criteria that are used by peers as well as judges in assessing projects, and sort of narrowing down the pool to uncover the best projects that came from the competition. And as Cecilia said, that criteria is available from the beginning of the process to applicants. They know how they will be evaluated, and it's not some mysterious evaluation where they are in blind. Then we identify different types of expertise that we will use to help evaluate and use that criteria for narrowing down the process. So we like to engage peer applicants because they are doing the work, and they are on the ground and knowledgeable about that topic area. We like to include program officers from other foundations, academic experts, community members, organizers. So we try and find a lot of different expertise to sort of help guide us and narrow down the field. Then we design an entire program of technical assistance to help support these organizations. For many organizations, as we mentioned before, the $10 million grant is a size of grant that they've never received before. So there's a lot of work to strengthen their organization and capacity to absorb that large amount of money, as well as just preparing for implementing a large new project. And then very important to us is leverage. We are identifying ways that we can leverage the initial investment and find funders for all of the top ideas that emerge in our challenges.
And can I interject for a moment here, Jenna, because if you look down that step, I remember someone in the earlier stage about competition said they were time consuming, and they are. This is not a fast process. You can do fast if you don't want to be open and transparent, but if you want to do open and transparent, then you need to leave time for all of these steps to play out. But what we try to do at Lever for Change is to do a lot of the work to make it possible for the donor to do this without a lot of infrastructure. Go ahead, Jenna.
Great. So if we could go to the deck, we have some questions that we frequently ask our donor partners in the beginning. So for topic areas, we are thinking about what are urgent problems that we are wanting to solve and need a big bet. So a challenge we just launched was the Racial Equity 2030 challenge. We are also looking at what issues are underfunded. So women and girls. We just ran a gender and women's empowerment competition. We are looking at issues that could use more attention. We know that competitions make a big splash. And so if there's a topic or area that we can sort of elevate great ideas and bring light to the issue, that's a really compelling topic choice. We are looking for issue areas that are right for scalable projects, and also areas or topic areas that have an opportunity for discovery, where there might be interesting work going on all over the world, and we want to discover and see what's out there and see if we can draw any trends or patterns about exciting work. So we would love to have some ideas in the chat thinking about those questions. What topic ideas should we be thinking about? What are areas that are ripe for a competition? And maybe while we are talking about that, we can think about what conditions are most conducive to use of a competition to source ideas.
So let me talk a little bit, because one of the conversations we have early on with donors is an assessment of whether a competition like ours, our model, makes sense for them. And competitions have some real advantages. So first of all, it's a mechanism that can kind of create a lot of noise for donors who may be new to their philanthropy, want to announce the area that they're interested in. A competition is a way of announcing their presence. It's also a way of doing a large landscape review. One of the donors that we've worked with was starting a new foundation and is going to use not just the one that they initially gave the grant to, but is looking at many of the projects submitted through the process to help form their initial portfolio of grants. Competitions can also be a way for donors who are not looking to make noise. We have funders who've worked with us who've chosen to remain anonymous through the process. We ask them to reveal themselves to the finalist teams, and they will do that, but that they have really wanted a quiet presence. And using a competition can be a way of doing an open call, but remaining kind of behind the scenes. So it can work in that sense. But when we look at topic areas, if a donor comes to us and they have really already made up their mind precisely about how a problem should be solved, what exactly the nature of the solution will be, and they're just looking for projects to implement that solution, then a competition isn't really a great tool for them. They should just do some form of RFP. If the community of potential solvers is really well known and well defined and fairly narrow, a competition probably isn't a good idea. We began by asking our donors actually to take a look at the projects we've already found through our Bold Solutions network. Because if indeed we already have a knowledge about what the projects are in the field, then it doesn't make sense to do a competition. So we really want to ask those questions, because it is an investment of time, not only for the donor, but also more importantly for the organizations in the field. And are we getting some topics here? All right. Climate change impact mitigation, increasing access to training for mental health professionals, how to center mental health programming, a couple of those in the mental health space, sexual harassment and gender-based violence, exclusion from political and economic opportunities. And then there's a comment that the purpose of philanthropy should be to help organizations and the people they serve, not to meet the needs of egos of donors. And I think most of us would agree that that's the dominant role here. That should be the dominant motivating factor in choosing who we're going to work with. So we have had competitions in some of these areas. We've only had 2 competitions that were really global, and I'm aware this is largely an international funder. One is the 100 and Change, that is the MacArthur competition, and the other has been the iconic, the Larson Lamb Iconic Impact Award, which was focused on the durable futures for refugees. And there's actually a session on Friday where you can learn specifically more about the refugee project and how that's worked.
All right, so
You're ready.
We have some topic area ideas, and then the next stage of our design is thinking about criteria. So if we could go back to the deck, we have another final poll for all of you. and thinking about what criteria might be most important in selecting a project. So we try and keep this as transparent and clear as possible. So we usually choose 4 criteria that we fully explain what a 1 through 5 scoring rubric would look like for each of these criteria, and share that with the applicants ahead of time. And then that is the tool that all reviewers use to assess a project. So we're curious what criteria, these are all criteria that we've used in the past for challenges and competitions. We're curious what ones are most resonant for all of you.
And I'll interject here that by designing the criteria, you also can help define the stage of project that you're looking at. We have worked with people who are really interested in things that have maybe been piloted at a very small scale, but they need more proof of concept. We've worked with donors who are interested in something that's had a large scale, a pilot, a kind of randomized control or some rigorous process, and now want to help support scaling. We're interested in working with donors who want something that's really innovative and very early stage as well. We haven't had one of those yet, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to do that in the future. So it's interesting on the access to testing, which has been so vital for COVID, is one of the suggestions here. And so this is one where I would ask a couple of questions about whether there's an unknown set, and I suspect there are, but is there an unknown set of possible solvers out there who may have good ideas that haven't been uncovered yet? And I think this is a space where there probably is a lot of local, small community organizations who have great approaches to how you increase access to testing. They also may have great ideas about how you address misinformation and how you actually expand access once the vaccines are available to get the shot itself. So it is a space where you might be able to, there might be a great idea for a competition. The challenge in that case is the timeline. So it's not the case, as I said earlier, if you want to do the full open and transparent process, it's not fast. And so if you're trying to immediately respond to something like COVID, it could be a challenge. Do you want to say anything else on that?
Yeah, I think the other thing we're thinking about through our competitions is field building. So if there are areas that we are trying to get organizations to collaborate on and come together and highlight what they're doing, that is also a nice frame for looking at different topic areas. So I think this testing one might fit into field building of there might not be it might not be quick enough to implement solutions, but even just getting teams to think about what that would look like in their organizations would be interesting.
So we have the results of the poll now.
So impactful is the runaway lead with 47%. And then we have evidence-based, which is 14%. Game-changing is 9%. And then a tie between actionable, collaborative, bold, innovative, and equitable. And 0% for feasible. So very exciting.
That's actually interesting because I think feasible is probably the most frequent criteria across our competitions. I've given an example here of what was the call for the Racial Equity 2030, which is actually our 3rd global competition. This is a global competition whose finalist will be announced very, very soon. It is there are 4 criteria I wanted to talk about a little bit more, but I want to address a question that came up in the chat, a comment. It said, how can funders avoid collectively focusing on topics that are the flavor of the week? Such an approach neglects topics that are not in the news, and it creates a sustainability challenge when a topic is no longer newsworthy. And this question is one that we actually have been trying to tackle. One of the ideas behind 100 and Change was be completely agnostic, to let people in the field tell us what the questions were that they could address. But we were hopeful that through our process, we might uncover topics and issue areas and solutions that might be identified as uncommon. We are in the process of evaluating whether that is true from our process. We're very much a learning organization and are trying to adapt. We've convened a small panel of outside people, consistent with what we do with our competitions, and asked them to look at a sample of submissions from each one of ours. each one of the challenges and give us a sense of whether they think we are uncovering bold ideas as one category and the other category is uncommon. I will tell you we're doing better on bold than uncommon, but we are finding some uncommon approaches and uncommon ideas about how to address what some of the most compelling issues are out there. But it really is a challenge to kind of nudge us. And I think the key here is to be open to what the nature of the problem is and how to solve it. So Racial Equity 2030, do you want to talk about those, Jenna?
Yeah, so this one was exciting because it is sponsored by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, who has a long and rich history of supporting racial equity projects in the US and a few countries, but they really use this opportunity to expand and discover new projects from all over the world and have a totally open process, which is something that they hadn't done before. And so these criteria reflect their perspective on racial equity and are consonant with their definitions of what they're looking for in projects, but also open to inspiring new ideas and new collaborations. So this has been a really exciting project, and we received over 1,000 applications for this challenge, which was also really exciting to look at. And I see someone asked a question about start to finish, how long these challenges take. They vary, but about a year. For this racial equity competition, it is an exception because we are implementing a longer capacity building period. So each organization that is named a finalist in a few weeks will actually get $1 million and over 8 months to really flesh out their project and get strategic support, which we're really excited about testing in our model very soon.
And this is one of the ways in which we have tried to make space to make sure that a donor can go to a smaller organization and give the smaller organization, which usually has a great idea and and the problem has the scale, but they may need some help and some time to build the infrastructure to be able to really tackle it. And that's partly of what we're trying to do with this one.
Great. So then the next step in designing a challenge is thinking about what experts we want to engage along the way. So we talked about how we ask peer applicants to give feedback to each other, which we've heard in surveys from applicants is really helpful, both in the feedback they receive, but also being exposed to projects that they were able to read about along the way. We engage a panel of judges for each challenge that includes all different types of expertise. We hire technical reviewers related specifically to each project when we get to that final stage of smaller group of organizations. We also work with DEI reviewers and accessibility reviewers to examine the projects from those lenses specifically. So we are always looking for experts. And I imagine many of you in the session today may be interested in serving as a reviewer for one of our projects. So we definitely encourage you to get in touch if that's something that you are interested in.
All right, we have go ahead. There's a question. There's a couple questions. There's a question here about the time that we estimate that applicants have to invest in participating in the competition. And so I'm going to divide that answer into two parts. There's the applicants who submit an application but don't become finalists. And we do a survey after every one of our competitions to get a sense of how much time they put in the application. The application itself is probably, they range from 20 to 30 hours that they've invested in writing and preparing the application. What they also tell us is we ask them, do they think that the amount of time was appropriate? And very high percentages, like in the 90%, yes, it's appropriate given the size of the grant that we're talking about. And we've asked them, and what we've also heard from them is that the application itself, which we have structured to be what we're calling a SMART application, each one of the questions that may have some technical requirements or sorts of issues that might be unfamiliar for the applicants, we have put together resources that are linked through the application. So for example, there's a question about your theory of change. Sometimes it's disguised in different ways without those words, theory of change, but there's a link to a video that talks about how you can talk about theory of change of your organization or what a theory of change is. There's every one of the questions that's like that has some support. So what we've heard from the applicants was that it was actually a supportive process to go through the application itself, and that bringing their group together to really think big. What would we do if we had a large amount of funds? Was almost a form of a strategic kind of planning exercise in miniature. The last thing I'll just add before we go on about the peer applicant review, which is something we've started over the past year or so. And it's been a really interesting process to ask each applicant to review other applicants. And that's another source of time there because they're going to have to review the other applications. It's about a 5-hour commitment that they can spread across their team if they like. But as Jenna noted, applicants have told us that that has been something they have learned from in the process. They've gotten an assessment of what they're doing. Sometimes they have found future partners. For us, it is a different type of review we get from the other organizations than we get from our panel of program officers and so on, because the kind of feedback is very much pragmatic and operational and really gets to that factor of feasibility.
Great. So then the next phase of our challenge design process is also very important. We design an entire program essentially about technical assistance. So once we have finalists for a competition, which range from 5 to 10 finalists usually, we design a suite of offerings to help them prepare for the case that they might get the large grant. And as Cecilia said earlier, we are trying to find funding for all of the finalists. So it's really important that they're all ready to absorb a grant of that size. So the primary support that we offer is strategy support. So we work with different strategy advisors to provide one-on-one coaching for each team and really tailor to where the team is at to get support on their theory of change, their implementation plan, their evaluation process. And so teams have told us that that is really key to just being ready to implement these large solutions. We also often offer teams planning grants. We know that this takes a lot of time if they are an applicant and then become a finalist and they need to scale up their capacity. So these planning grants are really important for just their time and capacity. We also provide some DEI and accessibility coaching and consulting. And then we also want them to be ready to be sustainable and have good fundraising plans for when, even if they get the large grant, that has a time limit. So what happens after that, and start building those muscles right away. So this usually happens over a 3 to 5 month period, sometimes longer, and continues as organizations enter our Bold Solutions Network after the competition has completed. And then the final step of our design process is really thinking about leveraging that initial investment. So we try and promote these projects as much as possible. We continue technical support through various workshops and coaching opportunities for organizations after the competition has completed. We ourselves are working on network building and sharing our data with other philanthropists and interested thought leaders who might have an interest in all of the great ideas that have come through our various competitions. And then knowledge sharing about what trends and great ideas that we're seeing and participating in panels like this. So we are developing what this looks like, but our goal is to really unlock that $1 billion for social change.
And there is a question here about what's our economic model for Lever for Change? I should have said at the beginning, we are a 4-year pilot to test out whether this is a useful mechanism, a useful tool to add to the philanthropic toolbox. MacArthur has given us a large grant to support those first 4 years. And so the initial cost of our competitions was underwritten by MacArthur. We are now charging fees to the foundations and the donors who want to work with us. The fees don't cover the full cost of what we're doing. We have grant support from the Gates Foundation and also from an individual philanthropist, Reid Hoffman, that is supporting us for now. One of the part of the thing that we think is a case for us, and we're sort of building our case, we're getting to the, we launched most of these competitions, and we've had 9 currently that have been launched, and a 10th one will happen early next year that will be focused on maternal health. we've launched these competitions, and now we're starting to see the impact. We're starting to see the leverage. We're starting to see the projects that have been uncovered. And we think we're beginning to make a persuasive case for Lever for Change as a philanthropic opportunity, because a donor who really wants to be kind of agnostic and let the field help drive where their funding going could do that by supporting our operation too. But we haven't really kind of started to make that case yet. It's on the horizon. So Jenna talked about the Bold Solutions Network, and I've brought it up. Let me just say some more practically about what this is, because it's a valuable tool for both funders, philanthropic supporters, and for organizations who may be on this call. We have a public-facing database of the top scoring, the finalists from every one of our challenges, plus the top 100 from 100 and change. This public-facing database is searchable. You can look by SDG, you can look by geography, you can do keyword searches, and you will see a description of the project, the short video that they submitted as part of the actually, usually it's a short video, either they submitted as part of the application or one that was redone during the finalist stage, depending on the competition, and information about what they would do with smaller amounts of funding. So they may have applied initially for a $10 million grant, but in the materials we have on the Bold Solutions Network, they'll tell you what they would do with 5 million, with 2 million, with 1 million. So you get a sense of some opportunities for those who may not want to commit to the very, very large grant. If you don't want to do it yourself, if you're not self-service, it's a lot of information there, the independent exploration. We also will curate list for funders who are interested in a particular topic area. We'll create a customized list of the organizations that is tied to your interest. If you want additional information, if you see some things that you're really excited about, we can do a little bit more of an enhanced curation and give you access to additional information about what the comments were from our technical reviewers, our due diligence, and what we found, and actually go back to organizations in some cases to connect you directly or to help collect additional information to help you narrow your pool even further. So this is really an important piece of Lever for Change, because this is where scale is possible, right? You can only do so many customized competitions in a year, both practically and also from just the point of view of how much energy there is for doing this. But if you can take each one of those and really take the organizations you've discovered and just use that to get a kind of multiplier effect, that's where the scale happens. And that's what we're trying to use the Bold Solutions Network to do. For organizations, it's also a resource to just see who else is out there in the area that you're working in. Behind the Bold Solutions Network, we also have a database of every project that's been submitted, over 5,000 projects across our challenges. And if you are interested in learning, getting a curated list that draws from that larger pool, we are happy to do that as well. All right, so we want to now kind of open the floor from some open kinds of questions overall. And I have, what are the sizes of the organizations that Lever for Change works with? Is there a minimum organizational size or operating budget? So each one of our challenges, the donors will specify whether they want to set a minimum amount for an organizational budget size. Most of them have not done so, but there are a few that have set that as an eligibility criteria. And that's something we didn't really talk a lot about. The donors themselves may have guidelines about what kinds of organizations they might want to fund. Some of ours are open for profits and nonprofits. Some are limited to nonprofits. Some will allow a government agency kind of participation. Others will not. Some will allow colleges and universities. Others will not. That's something that we work with the individual donor to help determine. But what we do is that we give the organization's information through that organizational ready tool, what the track record has been for organizations that have budgets of different sizes. And one of the things we found is kind of interesting from our evaluation panel. We mapped out organization size, and what we found is that there was a slightly lower score that was associated with a budget below 5 million. But the difference wasn't huge in terms of the scores that the judges gave. There was also a lower score, and almost the same kind of lower score, to organizations that were really large. I think our evaluation panels recognize that part of the idea of competitions is discovery, and they probably are a little bit like, well, that very big organization isn't necessarily one that's going to be discovery that will be exciting to give this particular award to. So the bias was on both sides, and we make sure that organizations are aware of the challenges if their budget is very, very small. But we've had a variety. I don't have those specific numbers with me, but we've had a variety of sizes that we've worked with. We try to mitigate the downsides of competitions a bit, and I just want to talk about this a little bit. And it also will get me to this issue of how do you reconcile this format of grant making with efforts to decolonize philanthropy. And it's an interesting issue because one of the criticisms that we have heard and seen of the competition model is the idea that we're bringing on competition and that it disadvantages small organizations and organizations with proximate leadership. And that's a serious concern of ours because, as I said at the outset, our original goal was to open doors. If you look at some of what's been written about the inequities in where philanthropic dollars flow, one of the things that's usually pointed to as a problem is the invitation-only proposal submission process. And what we've tried to do was to replace the invitation-only to give many opportunities, to give organizations of various sizes and with various backgrounds an opportunity to propose. The other piece of this, which to me adheres to the decolonized philanthropy argument, is this idea that we are pushing that the way the problem will be solved, the way that the strategy that will be used, the specific nature of the solution will be something that the organization defines, not the donor. So we're trying to actively transfer agency to the problem solvers, to the organizations in the field to try and do that. And maybe before we do that, let me just go to the next slide. If you have that one on communities. So the other sort of pieces to this is that we require that every one of the finalists who are emerged from our challenges document for us that they have authentic engagement with communities of interest. Now, for many of our donors, there's a specific expectation, and many of our evaluators, that there be representation from the community in the project proposal on the project team. And otherwise, you'll see really low scores on feasibility. And then sometimes we have specific criteria, as we did with, I think, with racial equity around community participation and leadership. So that's one way that we've built it in. We have had the evaluation process. We can set it up because as we've said, these panels can be constructed in lots of different ways. I have been talking to some donors about the prospect of defining the award, maybe define the topic area and maybe not, but then put the entire decision process about how that competition is going to be designed in the hands of a community advisory group. So I think there are ways of structuring these to be really explicit about this effort to move decision-making and power from being centralized in institutional funders or individual ultra-high net worth donors to more of a community-driven kind of process. Let's back up to the one on the other ways, because I just want to remind you, because there's all sorts of ways we've tried to mitigate the downsides. So I've talked about our commitment to openness and transparency, so you know what the rules are. You're not submitting a proposal without having any idea, and you get a no thank you, and you don't know why, you don't know what the criteria were, you don't know any of those things. We've tried to incentivize collaboration. We do constructive feedback at every stage of the review process. We have the technical assistance, and then, and I think this is what's more exciting, is the fact that we have been able to bring funding in for pretty much every one of our competitions that exceeds what the initial award amount commitment was.
We also have a question about what percentage of time and resources we recommend a small NGO devote to entering competitions. And I think one of the tools that we've implemented in all of our challenges is an organizational readiness tool. So we ask all potential applicants who are interested in applying to complete a really short 5-question organizational readiness tool that aligns with the criteria and the eligibility requirements and the wishes of the donors of what they actually are interested in funding, with the hopes that some organizations will fill that out and realize that this might not be the right challenge to apply to, or their organization isn't quite ready, depending on the donor's wishes for stages of development, types of organizations that they are looking for. So that's one tool that we hope organizations use to sort of dismiss themselves from the beginning without wasting any of their development time in applying to something that they might not have a chance at doing. We also have tried to streamline our application as much as possible, and keep it as short as possible with getting enough information for reviewers to complete their reviews. And so that's something that we are constantly assessing with our third-party evaluator and getting input from both applicants and evaluators about how we can better streamline the application process.
And on the funder side, there's a question about the funders using this kind of tool as part of what they do. And let me just say a couple things. So first of all, I mentioned earlier, we don't think every topic or every theme or every issue that you're looking at is necessarily amenable to a competition. And that's something that we're happy to talk with funders about and help them figure out whether this kind of method makes sense. But the second is that even if it does make sense, I think what's most attractive from my perspective, and this is the way that MacArthur's thought about 100 and change, is that once over some time period, so for MacArthur with 100 and change, it's 3 to 4 years. For the new donors that we just worked with on the Economic Opportunity Challenge, it could be 4 to 5 years before they exhaust the pool of organizations that they identified through this open call. So it is not something you want to do on a regular basis. It's a space that I hope provides a place where the funders who may not want to, it's challenging to do open calls and to have all your grant making be open, but to do this periodically, to find out who's out there that you didn't know about, to find out what approaches are out there that you didn't know about, that I think this is something that can be worth doing every 3 to 4 years and so forth.
We can put our website in the chat, and I put the Bold Solutions Network website in there as well. But we would be eager to hear more from all of you, and thank you for all of your time today. Or do we have more time, Cecilia?
I think we do have more time, right?
Oh, we do. Okay.
Yeah. We have more time. All right. So I will talk a little bit about some of the competitions that we have out there as we wait for any additional questions that people had from the field overall. We've talked about the Kellogg and the Racial Equity 2030, which was an interesting challenge because it was a global challenge. And we knew that in that case, the notion of racial equity varied a lot across the world. And Jenna, could you say a little bit about the attitude Kellogg took on this?
Yeah, so Kellogg, as I said earlier, they primarily funded in the United States and a few Caribbean countries, but they were really interested in looking at what racial equity means globally and different approaches that organizations were taking. So they had a real discovery mindset for approaching this challenge, and also a learning mindset, and they're really excited to sort of learn alongside these organizations, which will inform their grant making for, they're about to reach their 100th anniversary in 10 years. So inform the next century of their grant making, and also sort of spread the word about how different countries, different organizations are approaching racial equity, and all of the structural barriers to getting to an equitable place. So they are approaching this with that learning mindset, which is really exciting for us, and sort of leveraging these great ideas and sharing all of the great ideas that will be announced soon.
And the other two that were global competitions, the 100 and change competition, if you have not followed it closely, ended up with 6 finalists from that. The recipient of MacArthur's $100 million grant was a group called Community Solutions, was actually focused on accelerating an end to homelessness in 75 U.S. cities. The other projects included the World Mosquito Project, which is a project that uses a natural-based intervention, the Wolbachia bacteria, which, if bred into mosquitoes, inhibits their ability to transmit some common mosquito-borne diseases like dengue, chikungunya, Zika. And that is a project that if you are in this space, you would have seen a recent article in the New England Journal of Medicine reporting on a randomized control trial that happened in Indonesia that helped to show the efficacy of this approach. Another project was Project ECHO. Project ECHO is really a global platform for democratizing knowledge about medical care. It works through a sort of hub and spoke system. This organization has been on the front line in many places in disseminating information about COVID, but has been growing over time as really leveraging the impact of a network of allowing people to share expertise across borders. The third project was a collaboration between the Clinton Health Access Initiative and the Murdoch Children's Hospital that was focused on oxygen supply in under-resourced settings. They proposed this pre-COVID. It turned out to be an issue that most of us were maybe not that familiar with until COVID, but certainly it's one that we've got a group of funders right now who are organizing around supporting the project. So if that's one you're interested in, please let me know. And then the last was a U.S.-focused project dealing with the presence of local news deserts, the fact that in many communities in the United States, and this is Report for America, there is a shortage of people doing investigative local reporting that can really be critical to sustaining democracy. If you have an interest in any of those, let me know. And then the Refugee Challenge, which you can hear some more about on Friday, I think that's in the chat box. The finalists there, this is always a test whether I can do this without notes, but I think I can. All right, I mentioned at first the Asylum Access, which is a refugee-led organizational collaboration with 6 refugee-led organizations. It's anchored by Asylum Access, which is based in the U.S. And this is really one that is about strengthening an ecosystem of building the capacity of refugee-led organizations to advocate for themselves and to organize around what their needs are in the different communities where they have been dispersed. Talent Without Boundaries is a kind of innovative program that provides opportunities for refugees who have skills that are in demand in many countries, and where there are visas available for skilled workers that are going unused to align with those opportunities. And so it really takes them out of the refugee visa pool and into the skilled labor pool as a way of kind of helping to have more people be able to have a secure economic future. There is the Southern New Hampshire University GEM project, which provides a accredited U.S. degree for refugees through a hybrid learning environment in refugee camps, primarily in Africa, although I think they are starting to explore moving beyond that. And the other is a collaboration between 3 organizations led by Village Enterprises, which is really a microfinance entrepreneurial development program for refugees to provide services and businesses that serve not only the communities where they live, but also the local surrounding communities as well. So those are the finalists in the the Larson Lamb Iconic Impact Refugee Award. And again, all of these are available on our Bold Solutions Network searchable database.
And then we have a question about evaluation, which is a great question. So monitoring and evaluation is a really key component of our technical assistance period. So we work extensively with all the finalist teams to come up with an evaluation plan. So if they were to become the awardee, they would have a plan that they can implement. We also encourage them to include a significant part of their budget to monitoring and evaluation, so they know that part of that large grant would be funding an evaluation practice. So this is something that is really important to building that muscle for the organization, but also relaying the importance of funding it to the funders that we work with. And so we can ensure that these ideas are effective when implemented. But we really want the organizations to take the lead in defining what that success would look like and coming up with a plan and tools for monitoring and evaluation.
You know, one of the things we really emphasize is that the organizations get to define what the metrics are. They tell us as part of the application what those metrics should be, and then they can work with an evaluation partner to fine-tune that. There is a note here about the searchable database, and I'm just excited to share it. We really want to get this out here. But let me make a note that even if you're a small donor and you want some help curating or navigating that list, please feel free to reach out to us, because if you need some help just getting it to work, we can work with you.
Yeah, and we're also happy to sort of connect you with organizations. If any of the finalists Cecilia just talked about are intriguing to you, we are always happy to connect interested donors with these great teams that we've worked with, and provide any context that might be helpful about their project and work.
And I just focused on the global competitions because of the audience here. But I will note that one of the other things that we've done recently that's new is that we have created a microsite for our Equality Can't Wait competition that goes beyond the finalists to include other top scoring applications. So if you're interested in accelerating women's power and influence in the US, there are some great resources there as well. Before we close, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. But before I close, I want to share a little bit about some of the innovations that we've been doing, because we focused a lot on our curatorial and competition services. But another element of Lever for Change is the kind of work we're doing to try and produce knowledge and tools that are of value to the philanthropic field. The Bold Solutions Network and the Searchable Database is one of them, where we're trying to model the idea of proposal sharing and sharing proposal data. But one of the other things we're doing is that I mentioned that we've got a database now of 5,000 projects that have come in through our challenges. We have information about how the judges have scored them, and we have their full proposal data. We are sharing that data with other researchers and with others who are interested in what are the right rubrics to use to assess proposals. So we've worked with the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, and they are working on a rubric that is equity focused. How do you go about finding the proposals that are going to most advance equity, and applying that to some of the data that we have? We recognize that sometimes a donor is interested in different things than what the competition outlined. And so we're trying to create some metrics that will allow us to pull out proposals that meet the different needs that donors might have. I talked about the SMART application. I didn't emphasize enough, I think, the fact that we have created really a common template that we're using across our competitions. This facilitates proposal sharing, proposal data, and this also makes it easier for an organization to continue to participate in some of the challenges that we've offered. We've talked about the organizational assessment tool, and I think the work we have in terms of promoting the top applicants is also kind of new. There's a question about communicating about our competitions to get the word out. We use multiple things. We try to get out and talk about them. We also sometimes rely on help from people who focus on social media, particularly when we're trying to do outreach to organizations. We do advertise social media kinds of advertisements. We have networks that we get the word out through. We also can begin with the 5,000 kinds of, and plus, because each proposal, we have 5,000 proposals, but that's probably about 8,000 organizations around the world. We make sure they know about it. So we try to get the word out as broadly as possible. I did a calculation the other day. Our median number of applicants to our challenges, and this includes some of the biggies, which attract a lot, is around 300. It's 392 is the median. But that's also we have the big ones attract a lot more attention. I'll just say it that way. So we do seem to be able to get the word out. Well, thank you for everyone for joining us today. We've enjoyed telling you about our method. I should add that if you are interested in competitions, we're happy to talk some more. There are people who just provide the competition services. They rarely do the whole suite like we're doing, but each one of those, it's possible for a donor to construct if they want to do something at a smaller scale than we're doing, and we're happy to kind of give advice and give you some direction if that's something that interests you. So let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.